Before we get into this episode of Weightlifting Academy, which is an interview with Greg Everett of Catalyst Athletics, I want to remind you that every episode of Weightlifting Academy is sponsored by the 7 Deadly Sins of Olympic Weightlifting, which is my free ebook all about the key things I think every beginner needs to know right out of the gates. It's the stuff I wish I knew when I first started, but just wasn't available, or at least I had no idea it was available. So you can grab that, and it's for free right on the weightliftingacademy.com website. It's on the right-hand side of the screen. It's pretty easy to see. Again, it's the 7 Deadly Sins of Olympic Weightlifting. Head over there, grab your free copy. The second thing is that this is an audio-only interview. So there is a YouTube video, so if you're watching it right now, don't worry. You can just keep on watching. Unfortunately, you're not going to be seeing my or Greg's pretty faces. Instead, you'll be seeing an image of Greg's book throughout the discussion, but the audio is all there, and it's a lot of interesting stuff, man. I've got to tell you what, this is some cool, good, useful information. Greg's a really smart guy, so let's just go straight into it because you're going to be digging on it. All right, again, check out weightliftingacademy.com. Grab your free copy of the 7 Deadly Sins of Olympic Weightlifting, and I hope you enjoy it. And welcome back to another episode of Weightlifting Academy. This is Nick Horton, your host, and I've got with me Greg Everett, the world famous weightlifting coach from California. What's up, Greg? How you doing?
I'm doing well. That was by far the most enthusiastic podcast intro I've ever been witness to.
Yeah, I've never been accused of being quiet or unenthusiastic.
I like it.
I sometimes joke with my lifters that I'm really less their coach than their cheerleader.
Well, that's part of the coach role.
Right. I just ramp that side of it up. So you are actually, you become really one of the better known coaches in the country.
That's partly weird, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I'm sort of realizing how weird it is when you go places and people know who you are, and you know, I'm just now getting used to this idea.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is because, you know, you get good results. Your programs clearly work well. You've got a lot of, you know, just proof behind what you're doing. You're not just kind of talking out of your behind. But that
not
doesn't
always.
Just come by magic, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that it takes a lot of years to get to a point where you're actually able to confidently coach people and get good results and things like that. When did you actually start out? Like, where did you get into weightlifting? Were you young when you got into it? Were you a little older? What's your story on that?
Yeah, yes and no. It's kind of odd, actually. I learned the lifts in high school, but I didn't really have anybody to train with. There was no coaches around. You know, my high school didn't have a platform.
Yeah.
You know, I trained at Gold's Gym all through high school, which they had power racks but no platform, so there really wasn't a whole lot of options.
Right.
And, you know, at that point, the internet was not what it is now, and there really wasn't the kind of information available.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had grown up in this current kind of internet era, it would have been a whole different story. But so anyway, you know, I've been a personal trainer. I became a personal trainer when I was 18 years old. So I've been in the business. I've been in the industry in some capacity for a relatively long time. And always kind of dabbled in that stuff, but again, never was really able to get serious about it simply because I didn't have the facility, I didn't have the coach or the teammates or anything like that, and I didn't know where to go. And you know, it wasn't the focus of my life, so I wasn't moving to a location where I could do it and making it the focus of my life. But so I ended up in Chico, California, which I think was the 1987 Playboy Party School of the Year.
Nice.
So I missed it by a few years, but you know, still essentially the same place as it was.
Sounds like your first few years of college were really similar to mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not just the first ones. And so I ended up meeting Rob Wolf there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Who had just opened a gym, and I was training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the guy that he owned. Or leased his gym space with, and just kind of on a whim because I was trading for website design, which was kind of how I was partly supporting myself at that time.
Yeah.
And Rob said, "Hey, come train with us." And you know, at that point they were doing CrossFit, and I was like, this looks kind of dumb. I don't I don't really want to do that, because at this point I had a power rack at my apartment and a bar and a bunch of weights, and I was perfectly happy just lifting in my apartment. And but so anyway, I trained with those guys for a little while and ended up asking me to partner up with them in the business, and so I became a third owner with him and his now wife Nikki.
Okay.
And I did that, and now all of a sudden I had a facility with floor that we could drop weights. We had bars that actually spun. We had bumper plates, and it really revived my interest in the lifting. And so relatively shortly thereafter, I sold my house and moved down to San Diego to train full time with Mike Bergner, which of course is where my wife Amy had been training since she was 18 years old with Bergner. So that's where I really finally was in an environment where I could totally be immersed in it and learn. Fantastic. Bergner was a really amazing mentor. And still to this day, a lot of the things that I say in the gym, I can still hear him kind of I hear it in his voice almost.
It's amazing how some of the mentors that you have in your life never really get out of your head.
Exactly. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that time I was able to spend down there at his house. He's very generous. He's a great coach, and I love the guy to death. So that's really where kind of the origins of me are.
That's great, man. That's really interesting. Is that where you met your wife?
No, I actually had met her at a seminar prior to that, and she didn't pay any attention to me. So it took me a while to kind of chip away at her, but
you had to convince her. Huh? Yeah. Nice. Did she have a requirement on how much you could squat or?
Well, she won't admit it, but probably.
Yeah.
Which, the funny thing is prior to having met her, I was about 200 pounds. Again, all I was doing was strength training. That's what I was, what I had always been into. And when I met Rob, he got me doing more of this kind of CrossFit stuff for a little while, and I was temporarily distracted with that. And so I lost a bunch of weight, of course, because you're running around like a hamster. And so when I first met her, I was like, I don't know, 175, 180 pounds. I was tiny. And you could kind of see the disdain she had for me. And, it's like, man, this is stupid. I need to get my weight back up.
Yeah, not a lot of women want to date a guy who can't snatch as much as they can.
Exactly. Well, thankfully, I could outlift her.
Okay,
at that time, but it was not a comfortable margin for either of us, I think.
That's hilarious. So, you touched on this a little bit, the connection here with CrossFit, stuff like that. You have had, kind of similar to a lot of us now, a lot of practice training people who do both. And there's a lot of people in the audience who do exactly that. They're doing CrossFit, but they're also getting more and more serious about wanting to learn the Olympic lifts. I know I find it, as a coach, kind of hard to combine the two. I mean, I'm not saying that we're coaching the CrossFit, but having people who are doing that and trying to get them to get good at the Olympic lifts at the same time. In part just because CrossFit's so CNS intensive, the central nervous system takes a big shot from that kind of workouts. But that said, you clearly become pretty successful at least, finding some balance there. What would be some of your baseline advice for people who are trying to do both?
I think the number one biggest thing is you need to figure out what your goals truly are. And I think one of the really common problems among CrossFitters is that they don't have clearly defined goals. They kind of have this really nebulous idea, I want to get better at stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a nice starting point. I want to get better at everything I do also, but, you really have to narrow down the focus.
Yeah.
Even if it's for temporary periods of time. And I wrote an article called Plandemization about this a while back, where it was look, you don't have to specialize in these things, but if you really want to make progress, you do have to set aside some time where you say, okay, for this next 4 weeks or whatever it is, I'm going to really emphasize, dialing in my snatch, or I'm going to get my squat strength up, or, whatever the case is. rather than coming into the gym each day and deciding on a whim what you want to work on. And the issue with that is that approach will work for maybe a year for people who are relatively new to it, because they're new. And if you take a new person, like my old refrain is that you take someone who's totally sedentary and you can get them stronger by making them pick their nose vigorously for an hour a day. It's like anything they do is going to work. But
that's it, Greg. That's going into my programs from now on.
Excellent. It's a good warm up. But what continues to happen though is after that initial exposure where they're making this great progress and having so much fun, they just hit a wall. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, man, nothing's gone up for a while. I'm feeling beat up. And it's like, okay, well now it's time to step back, kind of take a look at what you really want to accomplish right now, make some priorities, set some goals, and then approach the programming like that. So that's absolute number one. You have to figure out what exactly you want to do. Yeah. And so, there are people who want to be CrossFitters. And to that end, they want to get a little better at the Olympic lifts so they can do 1,000 of them in a row, or, whatever the workout is that day. Yeah. And that's fine. But that's very different from someone who really wants to lean more towards the weightlifting side of things, but just doesn't want to be totally out of shape. They want to be able to walk up and down stairs without sounding like me.
Exactly.
Like I get out of breath is rolling over in bed these days. So, and so obviously how you approach that's going to be different. But in any case, I usually will look at that as I want my foundation, I want my base to be the strength program or the weightlifting program. That's the foundation around which we build everything else. So once you have that, then you can say, okay, well, here now is the conditioning work that this person's going to be able to handle.
Sure.
And if you can't really get that up to the level you need, then you pare down the lifting side of things, and you're constantly adjusting. So
okay. Do you feel like there's obviously the technical side of weightlifting is, everybody knows that that's hard. Do you also feel like maybe the strength gaining is a harder skill than just getting somebody conditioned? Or do you feel like that's maybe not the case and it's totally individual based on the person?
No, I do think it's easier to get someone conditioned than to get them strong, generally speaking. And I think that's why a lot of times I return to the advice, well, back off your conditioning for a while, spend some time getting stronger and just kind of maintain that little baseline of conditioning. Mm-hmm. And once you've got that bigger engine, it's going to be relatively quick and easy to get that conditioning back without losing all that strength you just gained.
Okay, because I think that's a question I get a lot is, people are rather concerned that people who are coming in from CrossFit, they're quite worried about losing their conditioning.
Oh, yeah. And getting chubby.
Yeah, those are the two things I think they're worried about how they're going to look, and they're worried that they're no longer going to have, the level of conditioning that they had if they spend too much time focusing on the strength stuff.
Right.
So you feel like, one, you have to focus on the strength stuff or else you're not going to actually gain any. But then
pretty
two, that it's actually not hard for you to regain the high-end level of conditioning that you had, or even maintain a little lower level but not bad level of conditioning pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, if well, first of all, to kind of take a step back, you're absolutely right that those are those two big concerns that the CrossFit crowd or the fitness crowd has, is they want to make sure that they stay lean and they look good naked, right, and that they maintain that conditioning. But kind of sometimes what you have to do is work with them to change their perspective a bit and say, like, look, you tell me that you want to get stronger and you want to get better at snatching and clean and jerking, yet anytime I suggest a change to what you're currently doing, you fall back on the, oh, I don't want to do that because I don't want to get chubby and out of breath. Yeah. And it's like, well, first of all, you're not necessarily going to have any significant change in your body composition and hardly anything noticeable in your conditioning anyway.
Right.
But the fact that they can't get past that really tells me that they're not committed to doing what they say they want to do.
So that's going back to your first point that
you've got to commit to something.
Right. If you don't have clearly defined goals for yourself, then you can't adjust your behavior to meet those goals.
Well, yeah, and if you want to change something with your athletic abilities, it makes no sense to say that, well, I want to improve this, but I'm going to do that by doing the same program I'm on.
Right, which hasn't gotten me there.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. So sometimes it's really tough to get past that with people, and you kind of have to trick them into doing what you want.
Yeah,
and it's funny. Like you talk to people and about, well, like, well, how do we convince new clients to come in, and how do we talk to them when we have walk-in clients or on the phone? It's like, you just tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
If people call in and say, hey, I saw your fitness classes and, I want to lose some weight and I want to, look better, my swimsuit, whatever. It's like, yeah, we can do that.
Right.
But then the next person who calls, I want to get better at doing pull-ups and, get stronger. It's like, yeah, we do that. because we do. It's all the same thing essentially, but you just have to phrase it in ways that people are interested in.
Absolutely.
But so guide me back to the question you asked, because now I'm totally off the rails.
Well, actually, you pretty much answered it. It was the idea of, whether or not conditioning work is something that you can easily maintain for the most part, or regain at least high-end levels of it pretty quickly, which you actually said that pretty good.
Yeah.
And that, that is something that I think a pretty big cross-section of the CrossFit / just sort of newfound fitness crowd is concerned with. However, there is this ever-growing group now of people who they move past that a little bit. Maybe they understand the argument you just made, and now they're moving closer towards really just wanting to get good at not just general strength training, but specifically Olympic weightlifting, the snatch and the clean and jerk. These two movements that maybe 10 years ago nobody knew what they were, are becoming much more popular. People actually know what this stuff is, at least within this fitness community.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. I think your point about the internet is dead on. Without the internet, this would not be the case.
Yeah, it makes a bit of a difference.
It makes a huge difference. How has this change over the last, not just 10 years, really probably the last 5 years, with the introduction of YouTube and everything else, and the newfound, weightlifting renaissance, I guess you can call it. How has this changed your approach to things? Are you now doing much more Olympic lifting in your gym than you used to, and less general strength and conditioning training? Is any of this really affected you, the movement as a whole?
No, thankfully it hasn't. And I think in large part, though, that's due to the fact that, when I started this whole thing, I just started doing what I wanted to do. Okay. And hoped that I would be able to support myself doing it. And so really what's changed is that I think my ability to earn a living doing this stuff has gotten a little easier, because there's more exposure and because there's a greater and greater number of people interested in doing this. So, we've always had the weightlifting stuff in place. We've always had the fitness stuff. And you know what? I'll take that back. I'm going to revise that a little bit. I think we have been able to emphasize the weightlifting a little more recently. And I say that because, really when I look at our gym, I consider it a weightlifting gym that does personal training and fitness to help pay the bills.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, really, that stuff subsidizes the weightlifters, because, as you well know, weightlifters don't have any money.
Right.
And even the really good ones don't have any money. So
yeah.
And in fact, it seems that the better they are, the less money they have. So
that tends to be the case.
We sponsor most of our lifters. A good number of them don't pay us a dime, and I'm fine with that as long as we can keep the doors open, and they don't take advantage of it, of course. But what we've been able to do more recently is say, okay, I think we can start kind of de-emphasizing the fitness stuff in terms of trying to get new clients in the door, and just let that be kind of self-maintaining.
Sure.
We'll take who comes, and of course, we always have that kind of constant trickle of new people who are curious. But we've then said, okay, we really need to focus on our specialty, which of course is weightlifting.
Right.
And so we've opened up a couple new classes that are weightlifting specific, and the whole point of them was to have a 2-day-a-week class. So we have 2 sections of it. It's like a Tuesday, Friday, or a Wednesday, Saturday.
Okay.
And it's an hour, really ends up being more like an hour and a half, but a class specifically made for people who want to do weightlifting but are not interested in being competitive and who are doing other things. So a lot of these guys are CrossFitters.
Yeah.
And so they're doing CrossFit throughout the week at other gyms around here. Then they come in these 2 days a week. They do everything related to snatch, clean, and jerk. And they do some strength work. And so I think certainly we couldn't have done that even 3 or 4 years ago. We wouldn't have been able to fill those classes, and now we're able to.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So that leads me down, let's go a little closer to weightlifting and say, so you've got these 2 classes. These are like introductory beginners classes. For people who are not necessarily, planning on being going down the nationals track,
right?
But do want to get better. I mean, they're definitely looking towards, dramatically improving their ability to snatch and clean and jerk. Let's get specific, maybe a little bit on like details on how you then go about. Like, what would be the first day? What would you do in your class with somebody walking in the door?
Well. With this class, we don't really change it for the individual. So it's how we would handle a new person in this class is much different than how I would handle a new weightlifter to the team. So
okay, so you do actually teach people very differently, or at least somewhat differently, based on those goals.
Yeah. So for example, with the weightlifting class, which actually one of my employees and my kind of assistant coach, we would call him one of my lifters, Steve. He's the one who teaches it. Okay. So we call it Steve's team. Nice. And it's basically he writes a program for 2 days a week. And so for example, one day is going to be more of a kind of a snatch emphasis day. One day is going to be more of a clean and jerk emphasis day.
Right.
So you may have some kind of lightweight, more technically oriented lift first, whether that be some light snatch balances or muscle snatch from the hang or, a complex, whatever it is. And then maybe some snatches or hang snatches, power snatch, whatever kind of your main thing is.
Right.
Maybe some pulls and some squats. And then, obviously kind of your clean and jerk counterpart to that the next day.
Sure.
And so, he kind of runs through little, usually like 3 to 4 week blocks with that, kind of building them up and restarting them and all that. And so when we have a brand new person to it, obviously he'll talk to them. Hey, what's your experience? What have you been doing?
Yeah.
And he will modify their workout for that day a little bit. Mm-hmm. I've seen him have someone on a PVC pipe essentially the whole time.
Yeah.
Because they came in and was like, what's a squat?
Right.
And so you can't just
sure.
be like, okay, look at the board right there and do your high hang snatches. And like, what is that? Is that the one where I lay on the bench?
Right.
So
only if you tripped.
Yeah. We had someone telling us about a hang jerk the other day. And I was like, that sounds cool, but I don't really know.
It does sound cool. Yeah.
Where to start with that one.
You might need to invent that. You can become even more famous.
Yeah. But it has to have Everett in it somewhere, right? That's the key. You got to have your name in the exercise.
Yeah, that's true. I got to get on that.
Otherwise, it turns into the Romanian deadlift, and everyone argues about where it came from.
That's true. You don't want to be like the Californian hang snatch.
Exactly. But so when I have someone who comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to be on the competitive weightlifting team," that's a totally different situation. So I'm the one who coaches the team. Exclusively. That's essentially all I do. I still train some private clients here and there, but I've basically just raised my prices to the point where people don't want to train with me because I just don't have the time.
Sure.
But so, for example, I just actually started a new girl yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk to them and find out their background, and based on a number of things like how old they are, what their athletic background is, those kind of things. I'll kind of decide what I think their potential is just based on those very simple things.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps me determine how much effort I'm going to put into it. Yeah. And I know that sounds kind of dickish, but if someone comes to me and they're 45 years old and, computer programmer who's got 6 kids, like, hey, I want to be a competitive weightlifter, I'm going to say, okay, well, maybe we should start you in the beginning weightlifting class.
Yeah.
Because that's not the kind of person that I'm going to invest, hours a week on, because ultimately they don't have the potential to be a competitive lifter at the senior level.
And realistically, that 2-day-a-week class is probably precisely at their level at this point.
Exactly. And so
even if someday they were going to become like a good masters lifter, the reality is that most people who are coming in in that age group, they probably need to have a longer trajectory, and maybe getting in a beginner's class like that is much more appropriate in the beginning.
Exactly. And so you can look at that. You can look at Steve's team too. As it's kind of like our minor leagues. And so, you can kind of putz around there for a while, and we can call you up to the majors if we feel like you're ready.
Right.
But so, for example, this girl I got yesterday, she's only 22 years old. So in my experience in this country, that's great. That's like a young weightlifter.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have different rules in this country than they do in, say, China, right?
Pretty much anything under 25, I'm psyched.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a 25-year-old female lifter right now who's brand new, and I'm really stoked about her because hey, that's pretty young relative to the 45-year-olds that I'm.
Exactly.
Nothing. I'm one. Yeah,
we love you guys.
I'm an old lifter myself, but
the
reality is that you're not going to get somebody being a big time national lifter without them starting pretty young.
And the reality is that I have, because my time is limited. Yeah. I've decided this is what I want to focus on, and it's not that we won't accommodate other people. It's just that I won't do it personally.
I see.
And
your facility is getting much larger at this point. I mean, you know, my facility is like an oversized garage, so we're all in there all at one time. With you guys, you're definitely differentiating to the point where, I can see how it could be great because you can have doubled up stuff going on.
Right.
That's pretty nice. Yeah.
But so, this girl, she's 22. She was a collegiate sprinter and a long jumper.
Oh, wow.
She's, 53 kilos. And I'm I'm kind of drooling over it. I haven't seen her do anything yet. She could be totally horrible for all I know. But it makes me think hey, this is someone who could potentially be a very good lifter.
Okay.
And so I came in. She couldn't even come into the normal team training time, which normally we train in the afternoons, although we have some lifters who will train in the mornings.
Sure.
Said, hey, come in Monday, 10 o'clock. I'm going to work with you. And so she did. I tested her vert. She's 5'1", and she had a 23.5-inch vertical yesterday.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was like, okay, we're going to do something with you.
Yeah, she's definitely got some physical talent there.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just kind of, I spent an hour and a half with her or so, and I just have some basic things that I like to do, and right off the bat, it's like, okay, let me see you back squat, front squat, overhead squat, and that tells me a huge amount about her mobility and just how she moves. And so her mobility, there were a little bit of problems with that, but nothing that can't be fixed.
Okay.
And then after that, I basically just taught her how to snatch from the hang.
Yeah.
Because she, in college, she had done some power cleans apparently, but never done any of their lifts.
Yeah.
And she picked it up really quickly. She's quick. She's fairly aggressive. And so just spent some time from the hang. I did some, halting snatch deadlifts with her, and then some overhead squats, and hey, go do some back and abs and come back tomorrow.
Awesome.
And so basically the point of that is the way I approach a new person totally depends on the circumstances and who that person is.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So definitely you can split people into two broad categories: the people who are not all that serious about being, full bore weightlifters. If that's the case, then you've actually got full on group classes for them.
Right. Yeah. And so that is the number one criterion for being on the weightlifting team is you have to be exclusively a weightlifter and you have to be competitive.
Yeah. I differentiate my group that way too.
That's
that makes sense. And I think that may be one of the more interesting things about how the newfound weightlifting popularity has actually enabled, more and more clubs to do exactly what you just said. Like you were able to say, realistically now, I'm sorry, you can't be on the full bore team, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Unless you really make this your sport.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
that means you have to commit to a certain number of days a week, et cetera, or else it's perfectly fine for you to come in a couple days a week and, we're going to help you out and all that kind of stuff. But, there's a limit to how much I could spend time on you if you're not that serious.
Yeah, and it's not to say that we're in a position where we can just kind of flippantly turn people away.
Sure.
But yeah, we definitely are able to exercise a bit more discretion and kind of guide them in the proper channel now.
Right. And what's great about that, and I would say that, there maybe is a risk of somebody hearing that and saying, well, that sounds rather elitist, right? I think actually it's maybe the opposite, because what we're all now enabled to do is provide training, like it's very serious, for their level training on snatches and clean and jerks, create a big funnel there where they can test this stuff out, see if they really want to do it in an environment where people are going to coach you correctly. And if it's something you're into, you can move up the funnel. If it's something you just want to keep at that level, you can just stay at that level. And this did not exist before.
Right.
There were not viable Olympic lifting clubs where coaches were making a living doing this and able to actually, provide this much coaching to this many people.
Absolutely.
Before, that was just unheard of. And now I would, calling it commonplace would be a little silly, but there are more and more clubs like ours that are starting to pop up. And that is a great thing for people who are not elite lifters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now they have the opportunity to learn Olympic lifting from an actual Olympic lifting coach.
Yeah. Which I'll tell you, it makes quite a bit of difference.
That makes an enormous difference. Usually when people tell me, I've done power cleans before, I've done some snatches, I just ignore it and pretend like I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Because odds are they probably didn't.
It's much easier just to start them from the beginning than to say, hey, let's see what you got and work from there.
I'm always like just absolutely dumbfounded if somebody comes in and they actually snatch well.
Yeah.
That's maybe happened twice.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So that's fantastic. Let's move towards that elite group, the people who are on your team, the people who do want to be serious weightlifters. Now, what's the difference there? How would you, obviously some of this is based on their individual stuff, but let's say we get past that first couple of days. What's the first few months of lifting look like for these lifters? What are you most concerned about as a coach with a beginner lifter? And again, most of these times you're saying they're usually in their late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, usually early 20s, mid 20s even. But so my number one priority with the newer folks, that first period of training is, number one, getting them the adequate mobility.
Okay.
But I say that only because it relates to what the real priority is.
Mm-hmm.
Which is teaching them and getting those exact perfect positions ingrained.
Yeah.
So I want to see them coming off the floor correctly. I want to see them, getting to that high thigh position correctly.
Sure.
The overhead position, your rack position, your split position, all that stuff. So we do a lot of volume at relatively light weights.
Yeah.
With these things to really ingrain. And so I really like position work, like halting deadlifts or segment deadlifts or,
sure.
Pause jerks, like all kinds of things, specific to what they need based on what I've seen.
Yeah.
And not to say they're not training heavy, they're still going heavy in their squats and their pulls and all this stuff, but
sure.
There's that much greater volume of work that's light enough to allow them to do it perfectly, because if they don't practice the perfect thing, then how are they ever going to learn to do it right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that I think is a really good point, especially for people who are maybe right now, they've been doing a lot of CrossFit and
Mm-hmm.
in their mind, they're thinking, man, I want to get more serious about Olympic lifting. The risk of what you're doing, when you're learning technique of some kind, obviously, if you do it badly over and over and over and over again, like let's say you do 30 straight snatches, right? Like a lot of CrossFit workouts will end up with.
Right.
You've just ingrained a lot of really crappy motor patterns that you're going to have to then unlearn before you learn the new one.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's not unusual, like what you just said, to spend basically every Olympic lifter program probably sounds a lot like that, where maybe the exercises are different, but they're basically the same idea, where we want you to ingrain, for proper technique with as many reps as humanly possible.
Yeah,
correctly.
Absolutely. Well, interestingly enough, I have a guy who trains here. We call him German Dave, and the reason being he's super German. Like the nicest guy ever. I love him.
You just smell like sauerkraut at all
he's
times.
got he's got like the very pronounced German accent. Even
Nice.
he's been in the U.S. for a while, but he came up through the East German sports school system as a weightlifter.
Oh wow! Okay.
From a very young age, and so it's fascinating hearing him talk about how that program worked.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, well, fortunately depending on how you look at it, but unfortunately in my opinion, he basically retired at 20 years old or whatever and moved to the US and became a computer programmer.
Sure.
And then didn't lift for 10 years. But you listen to him talk about it, and it's like when they first started them, they didn't snatch or clean and jerk with anything but essentially a stick for like at least a year. And so it was just like, you need to do this exactly right, and you need to do it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But what that produced was a guy who could take over 10 years of lifting off, not do anything physical, and come back, and he's weighing about 78, 80 kilos, and he's snatching 110 and clean and jerking 140.
Wow, after a 10-year layoff, no less.
And his all-time best was a 75 or whatever it was like 130 and 170. And so he's 38 years old. And like technically he looks exactly the same on day one when he snatched or whatever. It looked like he had never taken a day off.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of motor pattern development that we're looking for. And like you said, that's exactly the problem with CrossFit as it relates to weightlifting, is that you practice such a huge volume of repetitions with poor motor patterns that it's extremely difficult to overwrite those with the proper ones.
Right. And that's the old line that it's worse to have to unlearn a bad habit and then relearn a good one than it is to just start right from the beginning.
It's so much harder.
So much harder. And yet that is in fact quite often what we're facing, because people have played around with this stuff a lot and maybe done that massively high volume number of repetitions. Very, very badly.
Yeah. And in my opinion, the barbell Olympic lifts just have no place in conditioning workouts.
Yeah.
And and that's one of the big reasons. Main reason is that it's just unnecessary. You can dig yourself into a big metabolic hole with other exercises that are simpler and don't interfere with the motor patterns of these complex lifts. I mean, go do 50 sandbag thrusters in a row and tell me you don't want to throw up more than 50 snatches. But that doesn't disrupt the other things you're trying to do.
Yeah. Like I think I would be a little happier if CrossFit as a sport maybe kept them in the competitions as like a, hey, look what I can do kind of situation, but it wasn't part of the actual workouts because of that exact reason. Like it's one thing for somebody who's really good at the weightlifting movements to say, I'm going to see if I can do 30 reps with this, or I can do 100 reps with this. That's fine, because you're already kind of down the road there. You've learned a lot, and it's only one day.
Yeah.
It's not that on a regular basis.
Well, and the interesting thing that happens with that, though, is these established lifters, when they go and try something like that, their lifts look essentially the same from start to finish.
Yeah.
And they look good. Whereas if you have someone who they don't have that background, the lift starts out a little bit shaky, and by the end, it's like it doesn't even resemble the lift that it started out to be. So, I mean, that right there is a great lesson in, movement practice and development.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the idea of, if you want to be a good weightlifter, spend a lot of time watching the movie The Karate Kid. Basically that describes the underlying philosophy of what it takes to be a good weightlifter. That if you spend the time and you're patient about it, at some point or another, you'll get the girl.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of that, I'm sure you go heavy every once in a while. There was a guy who asked a question, something like, how does sex affect your training? And the more specific question was like, if you're having sex 4 to 5 times a week, Is that basically going to make hurt your training? And I kind of wanted to respond like, man, if you're getting laid 4 to 5 times a week, why do you care about weightlifting? Like you're set.
Yeah, you're done. Didn't you reach your goals?
Yeah. Why would you lift weights anymore if you're not trying to get girls?
Yeah, this guy's priorities all messed up.
Yeah. I refrained from posting that because
that's awesome. So let's say we had this. Okay, so you had this theoretical lifter. They've gone through this however long it takes them phase of drilling in a lot of the motor patterns the way you want to see them. Things are going well. They're moving farther. When you've got more of an intermediate lifter, which is that sort of weird nebulous phase where a lot of us stay for the rest of our lives.
Exactly.
Do you change your programming pretty substantially over the course of a year, or does it look relatively similar throughout the year? And if so, what's it look like?
It depends on the lifter. So generally how I approach this is that I write kind of a team program.
Yeah.
And that's used by all the lifters who, like you said, are kind of in that intermediate state, quite lifting at national level yet. They're not brand new, so they don't need specific programming.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just kind of the general program where it's like you don't really need any specific work. So you're going to be here until you get to a level that you do need that. Yeah. And, we'll make day-to-day modifications as needed. Like if someone's wrist is hurting or whatever, we'll change it up. But then once someone gets to that national level, or they're like, they're right at that threshold, then I'll write them individual programs. So, at any given day in here, there'll be 6 different people on 6 different programs.
Interesting.
But so in terms of how those programs change throughout a year, it really depends on the person. If, generally what I like to think of as the weightlifting season is like you have the American Open as kind of your lower tier national meet, and the nationals is your top end one.
Sure.
And so following nationals, kind of consider that like preseason almost. It's like the focus really needs to be getting strong, really pushing the squat strength first, and then maybe kind of transitioning into really pushing the pulling strength a little bit. And then by the time you get to Americans, obviously you've kind of transitioned into more of a competition lift emphasis phase. But I still kind of do that for the people who aren't lifting at those meets yet. I kind of design the year that way anyway.
Yeah.
But so you basically have like 2 giant macro cycles for half the year.
Gotcha.
From nationals to Americans, and then from Americans to nationals. And so that first one is going to be definitely higher volume, more strength oriented, although it will transition into your competition lift emphasis stuff.
Yeah. But
then that second one, Americans to nationals, will definitely be more geared toward developing the competition lifts.
Gotcha.
But how much it's emphasized in one way or the other will depend on the person. So like obviously if I have someone in here who has a huge back squat but doesn't snatch and clean and jerk very much relative to that, I'm not going to put them on a squat cycle for 6 months and downplay their snatch and clean and jerk. Like they need to snatch and clean and jerk, and they need to do whatever technical work is required to fix those problems.
Yeah.
That whatever is holding them back.
Just getting stronger is not going to cut it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where it's like it's a strength sport. You always have to get stronger.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of maintain that interplay of those two things, because again, if you have a guy who's squatting 200 kilos but he snatches 60, there's a big problem.
Yeah.
And it's not with his squat.
Right.
So it's, do you want to really squat 5 days a week, or do you want to squat even once or twice a week and really focus? Okay, what's wrong with this guy's snatch? Is he super weak overhead? Does he have mobility issues? Is he just a basket case mentally? What is the problem? And then you've got to build the program around that.
Yeah. So that's I think a really important takeaway point, actually, the idea that you have a general routine, but fundamentally everybody has to adapt it to themselves, or you have to adapt it for them to themselves, so that whatever problems they specifically have, they're being addressed.
Right.
Because we're all alike in that we're all humans, but we're also all quite different from one another.
Right. And the nice thing about having that kind of base template is, number one, schedule wise, it kind of keeps everyone together.
Yeah, it's
Because
important.
it's really difficult to keep track of like 12 different programs that start and stop at different times. I mean, I've done it before. It's a nightmare. And so that's a big thing. But then also, when you have a gym full of lifters, it's kind of nice to have them all doing similar things on a day.
Yeah.
It's nice for you as a coach, but also it's good for them because it's easier for them to be supportive teammates.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. Maybe gets underemphasized that even if two lifters, maybe they could be doing something slightly different from one another, as long as it's close enough where they feel like they're kind of doing the same thing at the same time, it can really increase morale and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you have one guy who's like miserable over in the corner just squatting his face off and everyone else is having fun snatching, it's like, right. Man, this sucks for that guy. He's not going to want to push it, whereas if everybody's miserable squatting, then it works better.
Right. Even if maybe they're doing different rep schemes or whatever.
Exactly.
Right. That's really important. I mean, it's a little tough. Like, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I'm all alone in my garage. Well, then maybe
that's tough too.
That's tough too. I've been
Tommy
there.
Kono did it though.
Yeah, that's true. Tommy Kono, he didn't suck.
Yeah.
But the good point though, I mean, the point to take away, even if you are lifting at home in your garage, is that, if you're online, you've got a program from somebody that you've been given, that's more of sort of a generic program, like maybe you just downloaded it or something, and maybe it's a great program. Programs are, on paper, they're just blueprints. They're not the building.
Right.
And the details they're very important, and those details are relative to you specifically. Like, they're not, it's not like just the person who wrote the program forgot to put them in, right, or something. Right. The reality is that no matter what level you're at, there's going to be some level of specificity that you have to wrap up around yourself. And I think, I'm a big fan of promoting the idea, especially to people who are, only being able to be coached via the internet, of becoming more and more of a self-coacher of yourself as much as you can, because the more you learn about yourself, the more you can adapt these programs to really fit your needs. Because if you don't address your biggest problems, they're going to hold you back for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's important for all athletes,
right?
Is to develop that ability to kind of self-diagnose and really be in tune with what's going on. Because, as a coach, there's only so much information you can get from watching a lifter. You have to be able to communicate with that person. And I can watch someone and say, okay, it's obvious that we need to work on, A, B, and C. But I also want to be able to talk to that person and say, hey, when you're missing these snatches in that way, right? What are you feeling like? What do you feel like is going on?
Yeah.
And they may tell me something where I'm like, yeah, you're full of shit. Like, that makes no sense.
Right.
But it may also give you some really important insight and say, okay, I kind of thought maybe we needed to work on your overhead strength, but now I realize it's more of a timing issue.
Yeah.
And so maybe instead of overhead squats and snatch push presses, we're going to do snatch balances and stuff like that. So it's that it behooves you as an athlete to really develop that ability to pay attention to what's going on and to learn how to communicate that with your coach. So even if you don't train by yourself, that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that ability to accurately assess what's going on, or at least as much as humanly possible,
and
then be able to communicate that, is a hard skill, but it's a worthwhile one to develop. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Well, and the accuracy increases, a huge amount, obviously, if you have two people discussing it rather than one person trying to diagnose it. So,
right. I mean, even just having a good training partner who's able to bounce these ideas off with can dramatically improve the rate of progress.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just that alone, just having somebody there that has like an objective, quasi-objective view.
Yeah. And he can call you a baby when you're not working hard enough too.
Right. When you clearly could have made that squat.
Yeah.
That's kind of true, actually.
Yeah.
So you've got a book, my man, and it's a very good book. I've had this book I had your first edition, and then I think I've got the second one now.
It is, and I'm not being hyperbolic here. I think it's really one of, if not the best books on Olympic weightlifting that we've got right now. I think it's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Um, and if you're listening to this, I strongly advise you buy it. Uh, if you're at all serious, even remotely, about Olympic lifting, it's a great resource. It's one of those books you will go back to regularly because it's somewhat in the encyclopedic vein.
It's a little dense.
Where there's it's different than, say, like a programming book, right? Like if like starting strength or something, where you take the book, you start at the beginning, and you end up at the end, and then you've done the program. That's a different style of book. What you've got, I would call it. I mean, it has programs in it, so actually you could do that with the programs that are in it. But it also is just a good resource that you'll continually go back to. It's not like when you're done, you're done. It's got a lot of interesting information in there. What was the impetus for you writing the book in the first place?
Well, this is another interesting story, kind of. But number one, I honestly was a bit uncomfortable with the idea of writing a book.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And, it's because you constantly have this idea of like, who the hell do I think I am?
Sure, yeah.
You know what I mean? But at the same time, the reason I did it is because I wanted to create the book that I always wanted as a beginning lifter.
Very nice, yeah.
You know what I mean? It was and it was that simple. It was like, this is the thing that I wanted to be able to go pick up when I said, hey, I want to learn how to snatch and clean and jerk. It didn't exist, for me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great books out there, but in my mind, they were none of them were complete in the sense that you could sit down and say, man, start to finish, this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
And not that it was the only way to do it. And I've always been, pretty clear about that. It's like, I don't think I'm right about everything, but I think this is the way that I use, and I think this will work for most people, and give it a shot.
Yeah.
But it was like, that was kind of missing from the library there, in my opinion.
Sure, yeah.
And so that's really why I did it. But what happened is that years ago, I told Mike Bergner, I said, hey, I want you to do a book, and I will write it for you. We will put this book together with your methods. Basically, you and I will sit down and talk, and we'll make sure that's exactly what you want to say and all this stuff. And I essentially wrote the whole thing except for the programming section. And unfortunately, basically politics with CrossFit and stuff kind of got involved, and both of us just said, hey, it's not, we just don't want to cause trouble for anybody, and this isn't worth it. And so I was like, well, screw this. I'm going to write my own damn book.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful I did, because that's provided a lot of opportunity for me. And I get, pretty much daily, I get really good feedback from people, and it's been really helpful. And I'm really, I feel very grateful to be in that position, where I can help that many people improve their lifting or get involved in lifting. And at least it's a way to get them started. And then if they get started there and then they decide, well, I don't really like doing things this way, I'm going to try this, then awesome. I really don't care. You know what I mean? I don't take it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things I like about you, man, is that, there's a lot of weird politicking that goes on in the sport of weightlifting, and a lot of arguing back and forth about silly details. But, you've always been pretty good about keeping out of that kind of stuff.
My general rule is that everybody on the internet is wrong.
Yes.
And I'm all over the internet, so you know what I mean? Like, you really gotta, if you take this stuff too seriously, it's just gonna ruin your life.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And I've gotten involved in plenty of stupid keyboard battles. And I've done a good job in the last couple of years just staying out of it, because I realize you really don't accomplish anything.
Right.
And so I'd much rather put all my time and energy, which is limited, into producing content for the website, working on books, and every printing of that book, it's rewritten. I add things or I change things based on the new things I've learned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, I'd rather just present that stuff, say, here, this is what I think, rather than get on a forum somewhere and go back and forth with somebody like you said, arguing about stuff that ultimately is just kind of silly.
Right.
It's the whole thing. It's like, well, try it. And if it doesn't
Yeah.
work for you, then don't do it.
Right. I would even say that it takes away from sort of the point here. I mean, it's a sport, AKA a game.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be fun. People do this because they want to, increase the, some level of fulfillment in their life. And if we get too far away from that as the reality of why people really do this stuff, I think we're obscuring the best things about weightlifting.
Right.
And not to mention, I think it's a guaranteed way to push people who might have been interested in the sport away.
Absolutely. It's hard enough to get weightlifters as it is. So.
Exactly. If it just looks like, oh, this is a divisive, angry place.
Yeah.
Who's going to want to go into there? That's horrible.
Well, and it's one of those things too, where it's like, from my fairly limited view, from my office here in California, it looks to me like there are coaches and weightlifters around the world who are doing very different things.
Yes.
And getting very good results from all of them.
Absolutely.
And so to sit there and say, this is wrong, this is right, to me is just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Right. Richard Feynman, the physicist, he said something. If your theory does not, I'm paraphrasing, if your theory does not play out via experiment, that is, if experiment absolutely shows your theory to be wrong, then, your theory is wrong. Get over it.
Right. Exactly.
And that's essentially what's happening, right? People have these theories that my way is the thing, and it's clearly the only way.
Yeah.
But then there's all this evidence out there that
I've had
wrong.
things like that myself. Like there's been things that I've been very much convinced are true.
Yes.
And then one way or the other, I've had an experience that showed me that they were not always true. Mm-hmm. And so that's really helped me develop that mindset that I'm very thankful to have, is that I'm just not I'm not married to any certain idea. Like, I'm not going to fight to the death over it, because for all I know, I could be totally wrong. And yes. I like to think that I'm right more than I'm wrong.
Sure.
Or that what I do works more than it doesn't work. But at the same time, if I'm wrong, I want to know. Like, I want to learn and get better, rather than just be like, this is it, I'm done.
Right. How could you possibly learn if you're refusing to learn? I mean, which is what that is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good. I mean, then you're just holding back not only your own progress. I mean, as a coach, that means you're literally holding back the progress of everybody you coach.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, you have a responsibility here.
I want to do whatever works. I said before, like, if I have to dress my lifters up in like dinosaur outfits and like, make them eat live chickens, like, we're gonna do it. I don't care.
You're starting to really describe my club. This is That's awesome. Well, you know what, man? It's been a great interview. I'm going to wrap it up in a little over an hour.
Cool.
So tell people where they can learn more about you, get the book, etc.
You can get everything at CatalystAthletics.com.
CatalystAthletics.com.
Yeah, and the book and DVD and that stuff you can also get on Amazon. So,
awesome.
Especially for people outside of the U.S., usually that's less expensive shipping. So,
oh, great. Okay,
that's good way to go.
Awesome. And I will have the links to all of that on the weightliftingacademy.com website in the show notes. So make sure you go to weightliftingacademy.com, check that out, and head over to Catalyst Athletics. There's a lot of cool information up there all the time, a lot of good articles, etc. Again, his book is just jammed to the hilt with helpful information. It's a very good buy if you're at all interested in becoming a better weightlifter. Even, I would argue, even if you're just doing other stuff on the side, CrossFit, etc., but you still are interested in improving your Olympic lifts, it's a great go-to resource. So again, Greg, man, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Had a good time.
All right, brother.
Okay, speak to you soon.